If I asked you what you'd want to change about yourself, most of us would say something about our external appearance. My nose is too big. I'd like to lose a few pounds. I wish I had a better sense of style. But if I were to ask you who you'd want to be, we might get some very different answers. Maybe changes in your personality, your character, or how you handle stress or busyness, what your relationships are like, or what they could be like. The truth is, most of us are not quite who we hoped we'd be by now. But the opportunity and potential to change is available to us. We can discover the life we've always wanted. Now is the time to become the me I want to be.
You know, when we put that video together, I love the images of the puzzles because, you know, I putting those pieces of a puzzle together and see, and that's what I've thought about as we've gone through this series. And 2 weeks ago, we placed the first piece of that puzzle when we started talking about our connection with God, and that's the beginning point. It's opening that door to a new life that life that God intended and for you to have and dreamed of you having. But then last week we looked at another piece, and that was finding calm in the chaos of anxiety, of fear, and of worry. And that calm does not come from within. It comes from above. It comes from God. And if we will allow God, He will lift us up above our anxiety and fear and worry because the Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. Today I want us to place another piece of that puzzle. It's living with margins. And what does that mean? Well, if you're like at my house, when we don't know what something means, we do a Google search. And this is what Google says. Margins is the gap between rest and exhaustion, the space between breathing freely and suffocating. Margin is the opposite of overload. But you know, this world tells us to live life exactly opposite. So I want to ask you a few questions as we begin. And it's, how many of you finish the day and your to-do list is longer at the end of the day than it was at the beginning of the day? It's okay, you can raise your hands. How many of you feel occasionally, or maybe it's often, you feel stressed? You know, the economy has changed. We're in the middle of, it depends on which side of the news you listen to, but the truth of it is, it's costing about $750 more for the average family to live a month than it did several years ago. That's $8,500 a year. So has that caused any financial tension in your household? Does your dollars not go as far as they used to? Does anybody in the room sacrifice time with their loved ones, their family, those important to them, just so they can spend more hours at work or get ahead in life? See, we live in a culture that pushes us, that challenges us to get ahead. We are told that we want, we need, we must have more, especially more than our neighbor who lives next to us. We try to follow in the footsteps of Mrs. Moore. Now, some of you probably seen this commercial, and any attorney in the room, I'm not trying to lift up one attorney over another, but this commercial is hilarious. So I found the director's cut. We're going to see the whole story of Mrs. Moore.
This is the story of Miss Moore. Ever since she was a child, she always wanted, whether it was more trophies, more glory, or more boys.
No, I love you more.
I love you more.
Hold on.
No matter what, enough was never enough for Ms. Moore.
More?
In fact, she viewed her namesake as something to strive for.
More.
To make life a little more sweet.
More.
Or a little more powerful. Or a little more bright.
More.
More was Moore's mantra.
More.
And so much more. So when she was injured by a 2011 Dodge Chrysler, she called Morgan & Morgan. It was the first time she didn't have to ask for more anymore.
Morgan & Morgan.
When you're injured, you deserve more. Morgan & Morgan.
More.
America's largest injury law firm.
See, Morgan & Morgan is even more than any other attorney. But you know, it's funny. Some of us sitting here in the room probably have actually considered being hit by a 2011 Chrysler so that we can get more. I mean, the world tells us that more is better. To buy more, to win more, to do more, to obtain more, to conquer more. Even in the church, we have fallen into this trap. You know, there was actually a religious poll that went out, and it asked this question: do you believe in the second coming of Jesus? And if you answered yes to that, there was a follow-up question. And it said, what would you do if you knew Jesus was coming back today? I love the reply of one man. Look busy, man, look busy. But isn't that our mindset? To be the person I want to be, I must have more than anyone else. And the only way to do it is to be busy. That's our defining moment. That's our identity. It is tied to what we produce, what we achieve, what we consume, not only in material goods, but in education, public events, hobbies, and pleasures. More is how we win the game. And the sad thing is we're passing it on to our children and our grandchildren. We see it in your school activities are not just enough. So you've got to sign up for this extracurricular activity and this extracurricular activity and this extracurricular activity until we have somewhere to go every night of the week because we love our new cars so much because they have more features than everybody else's. We can eat supper in them every night and we want to live that life. But the hard thing is, this kind of lifestyle is killing us. No wonder the divorce rate is going through the roof. Suicide, anxiety, loneliness, and violence are at epidemic levels. And folks, as bad as you don't want to hear this, this kind of life is not biblical. You cannot sustain it. We cannot continue to live at a pace that we are living. Jesus, that's not His plan for us. Actually, I think it's Satan's plan for us to keep us busy. And as people who want to become that person that God wants us to be, I think we need to take these words to heart from Paul, from Romans in the 12th chapter, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this age. In other words, don't let this age, this world, tell us how we should live. Maybe more is not enough. Maybe being busy is not the answer. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Now, I realize I may be stepping on your toes. But the truth of it is, if we are ever going to be the person that we want to be, the person that God wants us to be, then we have to turn away from the culture and allow God to transform us into that countercultural follower of Jesus. What He's called us to be. So this morning I want us to look at how we live life with margins. How can we become the person that God made us to be? See, to begin life with margins. To give ourselves, see what I loved about that Google definition is that breathing freely and suffocating. I want us to breathe freely, to live life. And I know it sounds easy, but you know what? It's not. Because most of us sitting in this room are driven people. And for driven people, it's a struggle. But I want you to turn to the Gospel of Luke with me, to the 10th chapter. And we'll read together verses 38 through 42. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need for only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Did you hear it? But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. Your first answer on your outline is you are to take responsibility for you. You know, it sounds easy, but it doesn't. It's not easy, is it? Especially when I'm speaking to a room full of Marthas. We are all distracted by so many things in life, whether it's making sure that everything is perfect in perfect order, or that everyone around us is doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We want to control it all. We want to fix our children, our spouse, and our parents. Our parents, our friends, and you just fill in the blank of what it is. See, we're so busy trying to fix everything around us that we put ourselves on the back burner. So this morning, I want to begin with this. I want you to listen to this. I want you to let yourself off the hook. You are not responsible for anyone but you. I'm going to repeat that. You are not responsible for anyone but you. How many of you, ladies especially, how many of you married your spouse and you thought, well, I can change this man and make him be exactly what I wanted him to be? Come on, you know you did it. Some of us guys did the same thing. We thought, hey, we can change this person. How did that work for you? Not very well, I bet. And I know some of your parents, and you're looking at me funny, saying, wait a minute, I have the responsibility of these children. I have to take care of them. And you're right. You need to give your children guidance, discipline, and direction, but you cannot make a decision for them. You can't decide their futures. You can't change them no matter how much you want to. See, the truth is, there's only one person that can change anyone, and that's God. Not you, not me, not another human being. Now, I'm telling you this from experience. Because that's probably the hardest thing as a pastor you have to struggle with. Because, see, you don't ever see it because I have to go in a phone booth to put it on. I have this Superman cape that hides under my clothing. Except it's super pastor. I can change anything. You know, I finally had to learn over the years that I am not responsible for the person I'm counseling or talking to. And it's a hard struggle. And you talking about for a people-pleasing person that doesn't like conflict, you sit in a counseling session where I have struggled and beat my head against the wall and given this person a counselor's name and number and talked to them till I'm blue in the face, and still they come in every week with the same problem, and you finally find the courage to look them in the eye and say, listen, we are done. I cannot change you. You can only change yourself. I have given you the counselor's name, and I have given you the counselor's number. I am still your pastor, but I will no longer ever again discuss this issue with you. It is now in your court. Not only was that hard to say, but it's even harder to do. So I'm telling you, I struggle with the same thing. It is hard for us to let go and to realize that we cannot control those around us. You can only control you. Of course, our best way of doing that is, we're all Martha. Because did you hear the last part of her statement? After she's distracted by her many tasks, she's finally had enough. She goes in and says, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work, everything, all by myself? Oh, I added the everything. We're good at that when things get out of control, and we blame everybody else because our lives are the ones that's gotten out of control. We blame others for trying to control our schedule or for making us crazy. We blame someone, and what it does, it shifts the point away. We don't have to look at ourselves. And after all, we've learned it from the Bible. I mean, in the beginning of the Bible, when Adam and Eve are confronted by God, what does Adam do? He says, God, you gave me this woman. Did you get it? He's not blaming Eve. He's blaming God. It's your fault, God, that this happened. But we got to take responsibility for our heart, for our loves, for our time, for our talents. You are the only one who can hold on. And if you live in God's light, you are responsible for your growth and your maturity and no one else's. Now, I'm going to use the words of Paul. Paul says to speak the truth in love, and we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, into Christ. Basically, Paul is saying, you know what, folks? I'm telling you. Your growth is not my responsibility. It's yours. It's your job and no one else's. When we neglect to live in those margins, when we don't set boundaries for ourselves, we lose control. My favorite saying, and I had a man scream this kind of at me as I walked out the door in anger. He said, he who angers you controls you. And you can kind of take that a step further and fill in the blank of anything there. But if you allow others to set your boundaries, that other is controlling you. So if you want to live or create margins in your life, you must take responsibility for you. That means you got to take an honest and truthful look at your life, and you got to speak the truth in love to yourself, and you got to make a choice of what is important and what do you want to control you. And then when you do that, you can begin to create healthy boundaries, which is our second point on the outline. And if you don't think it's important, listen to a man that's much wiser than I am. Solomon in Proverbs wrote these words. In Proverbs 25:28, a person without self-control is like a house with doors and windows knocked out. Now, I know Solomon didn't mention boundaries, but he did say self-control, and self-control is what? An important part of boundaries. So what is a boundary? I bet you already know. In the simplest term, a boundary is a property line. It's the beginning of something and the end of something. You know, example is you can go to the courthouse, you could look up your address, and you can find a plot map. And it'll show your property lines. Of course, nowadays you can just actually download an app on your phone and you can do the same thing. And you can see where your property ends and when your neighbor's begins. Well, it's the same way in relationships and in life. Boundaries are when we realize where one thing ends and another begins. Life without boundaries is a life filled with confusion and disorganization. But a life with boundaries is filled with limits and definitions of what is important to us and what will or will not control us. When you begin to set and create those healthy boundaries in your life, you begin to live in freedom. A freedom to live life the way God intended for it to be. So this morning, where do you need to set some boundaries? What has control of you? What is keeping you from creating margins in your life? Now, I know some of you are probably sitting out here thinking, well, now I don't know about this setting boundaries thing. I just can't set any boundaries in my life. All right, how many of you are parents? Grandparents? You can raise both hands. All right, when your children or grandchildren are at your house, do you say, well, listen, sweetie, you probably, as a grandparent, there may be some danger of this, but do you say, you know, okay, kids, you can do whatever you want to do. If you want to stay out all night, I'm okay with that. That's your decision. You let them decide when and where they're going to come home. Or what if they're younger? I bet you say, well, listen, it really doesn't matter about bedtime. You just decide when it's comfortable for you to go to bed. Or on your phone, you can do whatever you want with your cell phone. Just go ahead. I bet you got limits on their phones, on their time. You got expectations? Well, congratulate yourself. You've already set some boundaries. So you can do it. Now, the twist here is, can you set boundaries in your life? What do you need to work on? Where do you need to begin and end? And then the final point is to prioritize relationships. Listen to the last of the text again. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her. You know, a time management guru, a professor in business at Harvard actually did a study, and he said we all have priorities, A priorities, B priorities, and C priorities. He said the problem is most of us spend so much time working on the C priorities that we don't ever get to the B and the A priorities. And he said the reason we do that is because the C priorities are usually those lesser important things. And he said the reason you do that, the first reason you do it is because they're easier to accomplish. And the second is it kind of gives you an impression that you're getting something done. But he said the problem is the C priorities keep us so busy that we never get to the more important things. See, that's the lesson in this text from Mary and from Martha. Is don't let the C priorities, get in the way of the best, the A priority. You know, the secret to success is living a life that's well ordered. If you put your priorities in order, then guess what? I can save you some money. You don't have to go to that time management seminar that you've got scheduled. You can just send me the money and I'll give you the advice right now. If you put your priorities in order, I bet you'll sleep better than you have in a long time. You don't even need that sleep test. It'll probably even save you a few trips to the doctor. The key to working smart as well as working hard is putting your priorities in the proper order. And when you put those things in life that are vital, you take care of them first, then the rest would kind of fall into place. And if it doesn't, it's really no big deal. John Maxwell actually tells a story of, y'all may remember the Eastern airliner, that the jumbo jet that crashed in the Everglades several years ago, Flight 401. You know, the trip from New York to Miami. It was at the holiday season, so it was a huge flight, and several people were killed. But do you know what happened? What failed on that flight? When they were coming into Miami and started to deploy the landing gear, the light did not come on that told them the landing gear was fully deployed. Well, the pilots, a very experienced crew, started going through their checklist of things they needed to do. They checked this, they checked that, and they realized that one of those things was to check the little bulb, the light bulb inside that. So they popped it off, the flight engineer did, started trying to pull the bulb out, and the bulb wouldn't come out. Well, after a few minutes, everybody in the cockpit, now the plane is in a holding pattern, waiting to land till they get this fixed. Everybody in the cockpit started trying to get this bulb out of the plug to see if that was the problem. They got so enthralled with that bulb that no one watched the altitude, and with each circle the plane was getting lower and lower and lower until it finally crashed. Here was a high-paid, well-experienced flight crew standing in a cockpit worried about a 75-cent light bulb, and they cost the lives of so many people. Priorities are important. And in this story, we see it. Martha is so caught up with everything that's going. She wants to be the hostess with the mostest. Jesus is coming to her house. She only has a short time, so she has to put everything together, and everything has to be perfect. Everybody has to have everything they need, and Martha misses what is most important. It's that connection, that relationship. See, we are so busy, what is the first thing we cut out? Our relationship with God and our relationship with others. See, if you want to live life the way God intended, if you want to be the person that you want to be, you must get this puzzle piece right and create some margins in your life. And those margins are about setting boundaries and about setting your priorities and working on the important things like Mary did, and not the C priorities. Don't let your distractions, don't let that 75-cent light bulb cause you to crash. The big idea for this week is this: create space for what matters most. Now, if you're like me, you're saying, well, now, wait a minute. That's kind of vague. Okay, I'm going to give you a simple step. Here's a challenge. Take 5 minutes. Now, I actually got this idea from Craig Groeschel, and so I got it on Wednesday, and I tried it. I want you to take 5 minutes every day this week to do nothing. Sit in a chair, relax, don't accomplish anything, don't worry about accomplishing anything, just be. Just be in God's presence. Now, I'm telling you this is a simple step, but I also realize this is the man that tried it on Wednesday, and at 4 minutes and 1 second, I finally opened my eyes and said, how much longer have I got on this timer? Because I'm going nuts. Because at about 30 seconds, I started thinking of all I could be doing. And my mind started wandering. And here's what I did. I cheated a little bit. I used the centering prayer idea, and I just kept saying the name Jesus. Every time my mind would wander, Jesus, and it'd bring me back to the center. So try that 5 minutes every day. I don't care if you do it in the morning, in the middle of the day, at night, the last thing or the first thing. Just take 5 minutes and be. You don't have to get anything done. You got 5 minutes to sit in God's presence. Now, for some of you, this will be easy. You'll sit there and you'll go about 15 minutes. And you'll start laughing and saying, I always knew our preacher was crazy. But for some of us, that 5 minutes is going to seem like eternity. But take that step this week. Just 5 minutes, and create a 5-minute margin in every day. And see what happens. This morning, as Ronnie comes and leads us in our closing hymn, I remind you this altar is open to everyone who would love to come and have a word of prayer. You came up here last week, picked up a piece of paper, and some of you prayed, and you came back this week. So see, it tells you it's okay. But some of you may be sitting here this morning and you're still struggling with puzzle piece number 1. You hadn't taken that step to connect with God. And maybe God's been working with you. Well, don't let this moment pass. Or maybe you've been visiting here for a while, you've been a guest, and you're ready to take a step and become a member. Today's the day. The doors are open as Ronnie leads us in our closing hymn.